Why has virtually every society throughout history defined marriage as the union of one man and one woman? Stay with us. Catholic Parents Online is next. Hello and welcome to Catholic Parents Online, a program where we explore the issues Catholic parents face while raising their children. I'm your host, Colleen Perfect. The debate over the definition of marriage has unfolded across America and at the federal level for the past several years. Now, the Minnesota legislature has voted to place a proposed constitutional amendment on the ballot this coming November to preserve marriage as the union of one man and one woman. But what is the debate really about? How does it affect society? And what is at stake in the outcome of the amendment vote? Here to help answer these questions is Mr. Jason Atkins, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, which is the public policy voice of the Catholic Church in Minnesota. Jason, an attorney, has worked at the Institute for Justice, a public interest law firm. He has clerked for both state and federal appellate judges and received his law degree from the University of Minnesota Law School, where he continues to serve as an adjunct professor. Jason has also worked as a teacher and journalist. His writing has appeared in numerous publications, and he is a frequent guest on the radio. He holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of St. Thomas and resides in St. Paul with his wife and their 4 children. Welcome, Jason. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Great to be with you, Colleen. Thank you very much.
Well, it's an important topic we're going to be talking about, so I'm going to get started right away and just ask you, Jason, what is the Marriage Protection Amendment?
Well, the Minnesota Marriage Protection Amendment gives voters of Minnesota an opportunity to decide whether our Constitution should be amended to provide that only the union of one man and one woman shall be valid or recognized as marriage in Minnesota. This is a very important question because it gives Minnesota voters the opportunity to preserve marriage before judges and politicians do so. There's a nationwide movement across the country to redefine marriage, to change it from the union of one man and one woman, and that's something that binds a couple and any children born from that union into something else, a system of domestic partnerships. And we're seeing this already in Iowa, places like Iowa and Massachusetts, where judges have struck down traditional marriage laws as arbitrary and discriminatory and unconstitutional. We're seeing it in places such as Maryland right now, where the legislature is voting to redefine marriage. We saw it in Washington last week, a number of other places around the country. We're seeing it in Canada to our north, where they've redefined marriage, and then of course in Europe as well. So there's definitely a movement to redefine marriage, and in fact, Minnesota, the same thing's going on. Right now, there's a case pending in the Minnesota courts by 3 same-sex couples seeking to have Minnesota's Defensive Marriage Act struck down as unconstitutional. There have also been numerous pieces of legislation introduced over the past few years to redefine marriage and transform it into a system of genderless domestic partnerships. One example is House File 1710 that folks can look up on the Minnesota State Legislature website to see exactly what's going on. So we think it's important that before judges or politicians redefine marriage, that the voters of Minnesota have the opportunity to decide whether to preserve this vital and very cornerstone social institution.
Definitely, definitely. Well, Jason, what's going to happen if it is redefined in Minnesota? People are often saying, I hear, well, how is it going to affect me?
That's right, and that's an important question. Folks are, I think, under the impression that when we redefine marriage, we create something called gay marriage or same-sex marriage, and simply just broaden the tent a little bit to accommodate same-sex couples. But that's not how it works. What we're really facing and what we're really debating are 2 distinct definitions of marriage. Is marriage a reality that binds a man and a woman and any children born from their union? Or is it essentially a system of domestic partnerships that are contracted between 2 loving and committed people? Those are the definitions that we're debating. We're trying to see which one of those should prevail in our law. And when marriage is redefined, only one of those definitions will prevail. Now, that's going to have important consequences for everyone. I think just to begin with, it's going to have very important consequences for individuals and families. Now, because we're creating and redefining marriage, the government has to enforce that new definition. So if we redefine marriage and create it into a system of domestic partnerships, the government has to use the tools at its disposal to reinforce this definition in society. And what are the two things that government has to reinforce this definition? Education and the law, right? So we're seeing in schools that same-sex marriage is okay, and in places like Canada and Massachusetts, they're teaching multiple kids about multiple genders and in kindergarten and third grade.
Yeah.
And parents do not have the ability to remove their kids from these environments. So if they object on a moral or policy basis to what's going on, they don't have the opportunity to pull their kid out and teach them themselves. In Massachusetts, a man who objected to having his kid re-indoctrinated, you might say, or re-educated, he was hauled away in handcuffs when he was questioned this and asked to pull his child out. We're seeing this in Canada. Just recently, last week, a Canadian court decided that parents could not pull their children out of the province of Quebec's heteronormativity eradication program. So we're seeing it with parents all over. Parental rights are threatened. Also, very core First Amendment rights are threatened as well. The freedom of speech, free association, of course, a free exercise of religion too. If you object to this new definition of marriage, and you don't want to photograph a same-sex wedding ceremony, or you don't wish to rent a hall to same-sex couples, or don't approve of, if religious people don't approve of same-sex behavior, then they'll get dragged in front of human rights tribunals or accused of hate speech or fined, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
So government has to reinforce this new definition of marriage if it's going to redefine marriage, because it has to have society to accept it if it's to take hold. And it uses the two tools at its disposal to do so, law and education. So people's individual freedoms are going to be affected very deeply by this. So that's one of the reasons, how does this affect me? Well, it could affect your ability to get an occupational license, to be a counselor, to be a social worker. Like I said, it affects parental rights and, of course, free speech, free association, free exercise rights as well.
Yeah, people don't understand that. They really, really need to learn. Well, I've heard the argument that the institution of marriage is in trouble. As we know, the divorce rate is very high. So why is marriage worth preserving?
Well, we know for a fact that marriage is in trouble in this country. There are high rates of divorce, high rates of cohabitation. People are having difficulty living their own vows. But our position is that marriage needs to be strengthened and not redefined. We don't want to engage in massive social institution in social engineering with an institution that's already in a weak state. So we need to be strengthening marriage and not redefining it. We know that marriage is a reality that unites a man and a woman and any children born from their union. So there's a very strong social interest in attaching kids to their parents. And that's fundamentally what marriage is about.
Right.
We often hear that marriage is just the love and commitment of two people, but we think marriage is more than that. Again, it attaches kids to their parents, and there's a very important social interest in doing so. The government is not interested in people's romantic relationships and regulating romance. If it was, then we'd give tax breaks to people who are madly in love. But that's not why the government is involved in the marriage business. It's interested in attaching kids to their parents because that has important implications for both those kids and thus the well-being of society. So marriage is very important and worth preserving, simply because attaching kids to their parents is an important social function.
Of course.
We're seeing all kinds of reality TV shows right now, Anonymous Us, and about kids growing up that their parents were or father was a sperm donor. They don't know who their family members are. So you see that deep existential need to be, for kids to be attached to their parents. We want to know where we came from.
Of course.
And the law has an interest in promoting that ideal situation where kids are connected to their parents. And that's a very basic reason why marriage is worth preserving.
Yeah. Well said, Jason. Well, how does marriage promote the common good?
Well, I alluded to the important governmental interest of tying kids to their parents.
Right.
And one of the reasons it's important to tie kids to their parents is because the abundant social science research is clear that kids do best when they're raised by their mom and their dad. Now, we're not saying that kids growing up in households with single parents or even same-sex households where they've adopted or whatever, that kids who grow up in those environments are irreparably damaged or they're not going to be able to succeed in life. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is it's a lot harder in those situations. And all things being equal, kids do best when they're raised in an intact family, a low conflict household by their mom and their dad. And law should promote that ideal. And we know that when kids are raised in that environment, they have better outcomes all around, better social and psychological well-being, better educational attainment, better long-term economic potential, less rates of incarceration, lower rates of incarceration for boys, again, better psychological health. The list goes on and on. An important study by Child Trends affirmed this conclusion, surveying all the research, and again, showing that kids do best when they're raised by their mom and their dad. And that affects all of us because long-term, the well-being of kids affects the well-being of society. When we have responsible, virtuous adults who've been nurtured in a good home, that's going to pay dividends for all of society. We're going to have better economic actors, more virtuous and more productive, more socially responsible citizens who act in solidarity with others and care for others and work to promote the common good. And so marriage matters to all of us. Marriage is more than love and commitment. And this government interest in tying kids to their parents to promote child and social well-being is vitally important. And this is what this debate's all about. Are we going to turn marriage into from a child-centered institution into an adult-centered institution? For us, marriage is about what kids need and not what adults want. And that's the key. That's the crux of the question.
That's right. Jason, people say it's unjust for the government not to recognize same-sex relationships as marriage. Well, why shouldn't they get married?
Well, again, we have to go back to the definition of marriage. What is marriage? The debate is often framed as who can get married? Why can't same-sex couples get married? Or why can't this person get married? Or why can't that person get married? But at the end of the day, it really boils down to what is marriage? You have to answer the question, what is marriage, before you can say who can get married. And marriage has always been understood, and you can read this in many Supreme Court opinions over the years, that marriage is a reality that unites a man and a woman and any children born from their union. Marriage has an important social function. It's not just about private purposes or private decisions or the private lives of two people. Marriage has a very public component. And government has an interest in promoting that. And not every loving and committed relationship is worthy of being called marriage. Now, that's not to say that they're not important or they're not good or they don't promote a personal well-being on life's journey. I have many loving, committed relationships in my life. I have friends who have suffered from same-sex attraction. But not all these loving, committed relationships are marriage.
Right.
So this marriage is unique, as the church likes to say, marriage is unique for a reason. It brings men and women together who are different, who are created different, who have differences and complementarity. It brings them together, and it unites them with their children. That's a very important social function. And folks say, well, this is discrimination. You're discriminating against same-sex couples. Well, it's not discrimination to treat different things differently. Same-sex couples, by their very nature, cannot produce children, no matter how hard they try.
That's right.
And whereas heterosexual couples can. So they're differently situated. They're not the same. And so it's not discrimination to treat different things differently. And they're not the same. And so government has an interest. The only interest it has in marriage is because children result. People have sex makes babies, and babies need their parents. That's just the very plain truth of it. And so because of that, government gets involved and tries to unite those children to their parents in stable relationships that have the stigma of permanence and long-term fidelity, till death do us part. Marriage still has important cultural and social stigmas that create an environment of permanence. And that's what kids need. They need an environment of permanence. They can't be living in a marital relationship that's based on the love and commitment of the two partners.
Right.
When the love and commitment ends, as we're seeing all over today, so does the relationship. Thus, we're seeing a huge increase in out-of-wedlock births. Over two-thirds of the children born to mothers under 30 are out of wedlock. This is going to have tremendous social consequences, simply because marriage, the cultural stigmas surrounding marriage, have been weakened. But our position is that if you redefine marriage, if you really legally affirm what's going on already in the culture, it's going to simply accelerate these negative cultural trends. And that's a big problem. So we really need to be promoting in law the ideal of a man and a woman and united to the kids that they produce.
Well, Jason, can you talk a little bit about civil unions? I think people are, they're confused about that and how that ties into all this.
I think, for a lot of folks, they're looking at this debate and they want to be fair-minded. They want to protect marriage, but they also think that it's important for, couples and same-sex couples or whomever in committed relationships to have some of the benefits that many married couples have. And I think that's a laudable position in many ways. It's a fair-minded, split the baby sort of approach. I think the challenge is with civil unions is that in practice, what they are is an incremental step in themselves to redefine marriage. So they don't satisfy anyone. So that in fact, all of the states where they've created civil unions, it's just accelerated the push for marriage redefinition. So it's not a compromise that anyone can live with. People aren't satisfied either way. And I think the benefits argument has been undermined because the marriage equality groups themselves have been now opposing civil unions as a compromise solution. They want marriage and the public honor and public stigmas that are associated with marriage. In Rhode Island, for example, in June, Rhode Island created civil unions. But as of December 3rd or 4th, the last time I checked, only 31 couples had registered for civil unions. And that really undermines the argument that this debate is about providing benefits to same-sex couples. Most of those benefits can be contracted through private contract. Quite honestly, what we often hear about hospital visitation rights and things of that nature, but every accredited hospital, to my knowledge, has to allow visitation rights to any two people who've been living together for longer than 30 days, which is why you don't hear of any examples in Minnesota where someone's been denied hospital visitation rights. And again, most of these things that folks are talking about, the ability to pass on property, durable power of attorney in healthcare situations, all of that can be created through private legal mechanisms. The same types of things that even heterosexual married couples, I know I've had to do some of those things with my wife. So those things can be created. There are multiple ways to give people legal institutions that facilitate care and dependency relationships without redefining marriage. I think there's a plausible argument that in a society that's aging, such as ours, where we have it's a transient culture where there are lots of unfriended elderly, many unfriended elderly, people living in nursing homes, et cetera. They don't have family close by. That we should think about creating legal mechanisms where we can help facilitate some of these relationships, between people, especially in the areas of probate law or healthcare. But to do that, we don't need to redefine marriage.
That's right.
And so I think the civil unions argument is a compromise that's really a false one. When you actually look down at the facts, it might sound good on paper, but it's not going to please anyone. It's not going to solve any problems, and it's definitely not going to end this debate. And I think if we look at what the Ninth Circuit Federal Court did in California just a few days ago, basically they said that California, because Californians had been, we could call it fair-minded and had tried to give numerous benefits to same-sex couples legislatively, but then denied them the honorary title of marriage because when they passed Prop 8, the Ninth Circuit Federal Court said that was stigmatizing same-sex couples and giving them a second-class status because that's what a lot of these initiatives try to do. They try to create a system of separate but equal. To use a phrase that then undermines the legal basis for marriage. And obviously in California, that worked out quite perfectly. So again, civil unions are really just a mechanism to undermine the basis of marriage. And where those are created, it undermines the legal basis of marriage and law. So they're very problematic from that standpoint.
What happened in California with this then? Where are they with that?
The Ninth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals struck down Proposition 8. They described it as a very narrow decision, but it has sweeping effects. Any state that has protected traditional marriage, but at the same time created legal institutions such as civil unions to accommodate same-sex couples, all of those places, their marriage laws are in doubt now. So this is a very consequential decision. I think there's a strong likelihood that the U.S. Supreme Court will take up the case.
Oh, really?
In a year or two, and we'll get a decision in a year or two, and hopefully that they'll affirm that this is a state issue and states have the right to protect their own marriage laws.
So how are things looking in Minnesota as far as you're concerned? I mean, pretty hopeful that...
Things are looking great in Minnesota. You mentioned that the legislature put this question on the ballot, and we're very thankful that they're giving Minnesotans the opportunity to have this important public debate. I get calls from media all the time saying, well, what do you think about this group that came out against the marriage amendment or that group? And I say, that's why we did this, so that more Minnesotans than just judges or politicians could have their say. And we welcome those opinions. We want to have this conversation. We're eager to have this conversation. And this constitutional amendment gives people an opportunity to do that. The Minnesota Catholic Conference has joined with a number of other groups, both religious and secular, in a campaign called Minnesota for Marriage, which people can find out about at minnesotaformarriage.com. And we are the official campaign created to pass the marriage amendment. So far, we've generated 13,000 volunteers this
That's
early in the
wonderful.
campaign. People are enthusiastic and excited about the opportunity to protect marriage. So the campaign's going extremely well. We're getting new organizations signing on in a show of support every single day, which is just fantastic. And it's a great way for people to become informed about the issues. We do, every week we put out a video called the Minnesota Marriage Minute, which you can find on our website. And that's a great resource. It takes a simple question surrounding this issue. And former KSTP news anchor Callie Yanta does a really nice job of explaining, giving the answer to the basic question that people have in their minds. So campaign's going great. I really encourage people to volunteer, to get involved. This is, as you said, this is an important issue. It's not just a side issue. I think people, they say, well, we have a struggling economy and a healthcare crisis and all of the other things going on. Why is it that we're spending all this time on marriage? I think that it demonstrates a fundamental misconception about what marriage is. It's not just a private institution between two people. It's an institution that has very public consequences for all of us. And the public understanding and public definition of marriage that is very consequential to the well-being of society. So this is an issue that we think deeply impacts the common good and has very important consequences for everyone. I think our opponents in this debate agree. That's why we're both spending so much time and resources proposing our competing definitions of marriage. This is a very important debate for all of society.
So if people want to get involved, they should contact Minnesota for Marriage, or
there are multiple ways
Catholic
to get
Conference?
Yeah, for the Catholics in your audience, Minnesota Catholic Conference, go to our website, mncc.org. We have plenty of resources. We have a great marriage blog, Catholics in the Pew blog, giving the voices of just normal Catholics, a different voice than the normal public policy arguments that you might hear. And how are Catholics in the pew struggling with this issue? How are they thinking about it? What have their interactions been? It's really a great resource. It's called our Marriage Matters blog. But we also have many resources, YouTube videos, constant apologetics tools, anything you need to be an active and public participant in this debate.
People need to know what to say. They need those one-liners and just what to say. I remember seeing on, I think it was the National Organization for Marriage, the best line is that
people can live as they choose, but no one has the right to redefine marriage for all of society.
That's it.
That's right. And that's what this is about. This is, people can live as they wish, but no one's got the right to redefine marriage.
No,
and that's,
exactly.
That's a very key point. We want to have a very positive campaign. This is a pro-marriage campaign. We're not attacking anyone.
Right.
There would be no need for a marriage amendment, though, if people weren't trying to change the definition of marriage. So those of us who believe that marriage doesn't belong, it's not a creature of the state that you can change willy-nilly.
Right.
Those of us who believe that marriage is something that government recognizes and supports, but it doesn't have the power to define, we're going to take this issue out of the hands of courts and politicians and give it to the people and make sure that they can protect this important institution. The marriage amendment doesn't take away anyone's rights. It simply preserves the status quo and makes sure that marriage will ultimately be, in Minnesota, will ultimately be a question of the people.
Yes, and like you say, build it up. Jason, just quickly, when we vote on November 6th, we vote yes. But you were going to say something about they might have it on the back of the ballot.
We don't know where the ballot. That's right. We don't know where the ballot question will be. We don't know how many other constitutional amendments will or will not be on the ballot.
Okay.
But people have to know that if they vote for the president and vote for a presidential candidate and fail to turn the ballot over or vote on the constitutional amendment, it counts as a no vote. So the government will vote no for you if in fact you don't vote on the question. So it's very important you pay attention to the ballot and carefully scrutinize it and then vote yes. The question's very simple. Shall the Minnesota Constitution be amended to provide that only the union of one man and one woman will be valid and recognized as marriage in Minnesota? Yes or no? We're encouraging people to vote yes. Yes, good.
Jason, are religious people simply imposing their views on others?
No, absolutely not. We're not talking about a religious understanding of marriage. There's not one definition of marriage that applies for religious people and one that applies for everybody else. We're not talking about the sacrament of marriage or any religious conception of marriage. We're simply offering our perspective about the civil institution of marriage, what it is, why it's important, and what the consequences will be if it's redefined. And just because religious people are simply offering their views, it doesn't mean they're categorically disqualified from participating in the
Right.
debate. And that's what I think the accusation is that, oh, because you're a religious person, you can't speak about this institution because you're imposing your religious views on everybody else. Well, the fact of the matter is, we've had a conversation here, and I haven't mentioned anything about theology, the Bible, or
Right.
anything else. I mean, we have a duty, if we want to be persuasive, to speak in secular language that people can understand. We're talking about social science, reason, experience, and tradition, and how those things, what those things tell us about the institution of marriage. We're not appealing to religious authority or anyone else. Just like anyone, we have the opportunity and the right and responsibility to speak about institutions that promote the common good.
Yes, good. Well, I think, is there anything else you would like to say, Jason? I think we're almost out of time.
Well, I mentioned a few resources through the Minnesota Catholic Conference, but certainly
Yes.
for everyone, remember, protecting marriage is not a religious issue, it's not a secular issue.
Right.
And we're talking about the civil institution of marriage, not the sacramentality of marriage or
Yes,
anything else.
yes.
We're just offering our perspective about an institution we believe supports the common good. We're doing that with religious and secular people across the faith and political divides. And people should go to minnesotaformarriage.com and learn more about our campaign and get involved. We need all the people we can get.
Thank you so much for being on our show. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Colleen. I appreciate it very much.
God bless your work.
Thank you, you too.
Marriage as the union of one man and one woman is in the public good. It serves the interests of men and women, of children, and of society itself. The marriage amendment on the November 6th ballot will give voters the opportunity to preserve this vital institution. Please be sure to vote yes on the marriage amendment. To learn more, check out the important websites coming up on your screen. If you missed part of this program, you can view it anytime on our website at catholicparents.org. Thanks for watching, and God bless you and yours.
Hi, I'm Callie Yonta. Welcome to this edition of Minnesota Marriage Minute, exploring various issues surrounding the proposed Marriage Protection Amendment. Today, let's continue our look at the amendment by asking, does the Marriage Protection Amendment ban gay marriage? The answer is no, it doesn't. First of all, there is no such thing as gay marriage in Minnesota. Marriage in Minnesota is, and always has been, the union of one man and one woman. The amendment doesn't change that at all. The Marriage Protection Amendment simply preserves our existing definition of marriage by putting it into the state constitution, ensuring that if special interest groups or activist judges or politicians want to redefine marriage in the future, they will have to convince the people to do so. There have been a lot of attempts to change the definition of marriage in Minnesota in the legislature and through the courts. Passing the amendment doesn't ban gay marriage, but it does mean that Minnesota voters are the ones who get to decide if same-sex marriage could be approved. And that's how it should be. To learn more about the Marriage Protection Amendment, please go to www.minnesotaformarriage.com. I'm Callie Yonta for Minnesota Marriage Minute. Thanks for watching.